So I would like to share with you the results of my action research project for my class on Masters of Education in Teaching and Learning. So by the way, I am Ms. Janessa, and I would like to give you a summary of the nature and the results of my action research. So I actually wanted to study the impact of chalkboard activities on student engagement and learning. So as an introduction, we already know, you probably have experienced that in the past 20 years, we've seen an explosion in the use of various technological tools for teaching. I have experienced the benefits and the advantages of all of these technological tools. However, I started observing that these same tools that we use for student learning could also be a distraction to the students. Most of the time, I would observe students just focus on their phones, on their laptops, and then there's not a lot of peer interaction. There's not a lot of interaction with the teacher, but students are just focused on completing their task in all of these technological tools. So I wanted to look at the benefits of using traditional methods of teaching. So I grew up learning with my teacher using chalk, writing on the board, and I would be busy writing down whatever the teacher is writing on the board. So the whole nature of the study is to look at the benefits of using those traditional methods of teaching, which is the use of chalkboard activities. I have observed that students have a harder time to focus in class because, again, the technological tools are now being a source of distraction. So, my hope in this action research was to look at how chalkboard activities, how students could improve in their ownership of learning when they're more involved in class activities. Chalkboard activities can also be a quick way so that they can show their understanding of the lesson. And also for the chalkboard activities, I will be using, oh, I used the desk in my classroom, and then the students could directly write on the desk, and I am able to walk around and give immediate teacher feedback. And I could also see students giving each other feedback while they're working on different sketch activities. So really, overall, this is an active mode of learning. Students are participating, students are collaborating with each other. So the problem is the whole point of doing this action research is that as a teacher, I've seen that there's a problem on too much use of technology inside the classroom. Students are losing their personal and physical aspect of learning. They get easily distracted. And again, just to reiterate, old methods such as using chalkboard activities could help in engaging students, could help giving them an opportunity to be more active participants in class. So I'm sorry, I keep talking in future tense. So there were different chalkboard activities that I used in teaching my lessons. So it would range from making concept maps or sketching the actual scientific models or listing down explanations or outlining different techniques and methods. So this is the thesis statement for this study is that through the use of various chalkboard activities, teachers can engage students in physical learning experiences, and that can impact their interest, their motivation, and their class engagement. Overall, this can improve their class behavior and their academic performance in the classroom. So, the study is done while teaching Unit 5, Molecular Biology. IB Biology students from Ruamurdi International School participated in the study, and at the end of the unit, there were surveys, there were questionnaires that were sent out to the students. All throughout the unit, the teacher, I was keeping a journal of how the students were participating in the class. And also at the end of the unit, I looked at two formative assessments and I analyzed the effect of chalkboard activities on student learning. So the hypothesis, again, is that various chalkboard activities will impact student engagement. Students will be interested, they will be motivated in learning the lessons, they will actively participate. Moreover, using the chalkboard activities can impact their learning. They will learn the material better when the lessons are taught using chalkboard activities. So for the methodologies, again, the chalkboard activities was integrated in Teaching Unit 5. So in Unit 5, there were 5 lessons: DNA structure, cell division, DNA replication, transcription, and translation. So the action research used a mixed method of approach. For the qualitative method, I conducted a preliminary interview with a student, and all throughout teaching the Unit 5, I was keeping journal of my observations of the class. So right after the class, I would outline major things that I observed in the class. And then at the end of the unit, I sent out a survey and a questionnaire. So for the survey, I designed 10 questions that addresses the impact of chalkboard activities on student engagement and their motivation, and also how it's impacting their learning. There was also an open-ended question for students to share their thoughts and experiences in doing chalkboard activities in the class. There was also my quantitative method, so I designed 2 formative assessments, one for transcription and the other one for translation. So basically, the formative assessment assessed student learning as they learn transcription. In this lesson, I purposely used various chalkboard activities. However, in my lesson on translation, it was just direct instruction. So I wanted to compare how they learned the material when I was doing chalkboard activities, and how does that compare when there was just direct instruction, just a pure class lecture about the topic. Okay, so the study took about 6 weeks, 5 lessons in 6 weeks. In lesson 1 and 2, there were different chalkboard activities on teaching the DNA structure. So students had to sketch the DNA structure to know the different parts of the DNA. Chalkboard activities was also used to teach the semi-conservative theory of DNA replication as proposed by Nasselson and Stahl. So at the end of teaching this lesson, students had to sketch the actual technique to be able to outline the process of Nasselson and Stahl's experiment. And then in mitosis, students were asked to sketch the different stages of mitosis in cell division. So again, for lesson 4, there were purposeful chalkboard activities that was used to teach transcription. So there were discussions about regulation of gene expression. So students were writing down the summary of the different ways that the gene expression is regulated. Then they also outlined the 3 different post-transcriptional modification. In lesson 5, so the content is as heavy or as difficult as lesson 4, but then this one was just taught with direct instruction, just pure lecture. Students were not asked to sketch their understanding. They were not asked to summarize or outline the different processes. So they were just listening in class when I was teaching this lesson. Okay, so for the whole Unit 5, I was doing class observations, again taking notes of big things that I observed as the students were engaging in my class. And then at the end of the unit, I sent out a survey. This was designed to ask students their experience, specifically how engaged they were, how motivated they were. And then there was an open-ended survey, so just asking them their personal experience. So I tried to be as objective here as possible. I removed my personal bias because the student may be experiencing things differently than I observed. And then the 2 formative assessments were analyzed. I used paired and unpaired t-tests to look at how students performed in my lesson that used a lot of chalkboard activities versus the lesson that were just purely direct instruction. And here are the results. So, first of all, based on the preliminary interview, before I even started this action research, I asked students like, what are the different tools or techniques that I use in class that are helping them to learn the material easier. So there were particularly one student who said that they enjoyed the chalkboard activity. It was a novel tool. They haven't used chalk in, I don't know, the past 10 years of their lives. So because it was new, they were interested to do it. And then they were really owning up to their learning. They would take pictures of their work, put it in their reading notes, and then they mentioned that it was a good way to summarize their understanding of the lessons. Based on my class observation, so every time I'm doing chalkboard activities, I obviously saw how students were all actively engaged. They were all moving around. They were all following instructions on what to sketch on their boards. They were focused. What I really appreciate is the positive attitude from the student. So overall, they were involved in the sketching and writing different um, models or processes. There was just an overall positive atmosphere. It's not like they didn't like every time I do chalkboard activities. It's more of the opposite. They were standing up. They were owning up to the different activities that they need to do in their tables. There were also very clear collaboration and peer feedback. They would always work with each other. Oftentimes, they will move around the room, comparing each other's sketches, each other's chalkboard sketch, and they would give feedback to each other. And I was also able to easily give them teacher feedback. So it was a very good tool for classroom management. I was able to interact more with the students. Um, However, on the downside, I've observed that when I give them the chalk for the whole duration of the class, they would get easily distracted and they would start doodling other things. Although I think it can help them in focusing, but sometimes whatever they're sketching on the board is too far from the topic. So it could be to some extent a distraction because they have something to sketch, they can write random things in their board. Okay, part of the survey, so this is a graph that shows the survey. I asked again 10 questions each. I grouped the questions into questions that will address engagement and motivation and learning. So as you can see overall, I use the Likert scale, 5 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. So 5 tells you that the students agree that they're experiencing more engagement, more motivation, and more impact in their learning. So overall, it's above average, but obviously, students overall felt that they were more engaged when I was doing chalkboard activities, although there's a little bit of spread here in the data. But at least it has the highest average score in the Likert scale. The learning would be the lowest score, and it also seemed like most students didn't have a clear understanding of how the chalkboard is affecting their learning. But they all share the same experience that it has motivated them, it has kept them more focused in class. The questionnaire at the end, open-ended questionnaire, most of the students said that the chalkboard activities helped them to stay more focused. It helped them to clarify their understanding. It helped them to simplify a challenging concept. However, there were a few who said that it could be tiring at times. So instead of being more engaged, they would become more disengaged. So I did a quantitative methodology here. So as I've mentioned, I taught transcription with lots of chalkboard activities and translation without using any chalkboard activities. So if you're looking at the unpaired t-test, so I took the total score of the students when I gave them a quiz on transcription, the total score of all the students when I gave them a quiz on translation. So overall, the score was higher in transcription than in translation. However, it's there's a big error bar here. So error bar was based on the standard deviation. So basically, although it seems like students scored higher in transcription when I was doing chalkboard activities, the difference may not be statistically significant. So I did another t-test, this time a paired t-test. So I looked at like 5 students scores in transcription, and that same 5 students their scores in translation. So uh, I arrived to the same conclusion, that although the 5 students have scored higher in transcription, their scores are not statistically significant with their score in the translation quiz. So overall, um, in terms of student engagement, there was an obvious positive impact in student engagement. Students were more actively participating in class. I have seen positive attitude and good motivation and also interest when students are doing their chalkboard activities. And this is in line with studies on showing that physical movement, anytime the student is moving about, it gets them more motivated to learn. So compared to just listening to the lecture or direct instruction, if they are part of their learning, they are more motivated to study the lessons. Um, However, I do not have enough data, reliable and valid data, to look at the result or the effect of chalkboard activities on learning. So, as I've mentioned in the t-test, although students seem to be scoring higher in transcription in lessons where they did chalkboard activities, there doesn't seem to be a statistically significant difference in their score. So, um, part of the limitations here, I will discuss next on the next slide, is that a well-designed assessment is needed to learn how chalkboard activities is impacting student learning, because there could be many factors beyond my control that can affect student learning. These factors can range from their prior knowledge, their background knowledge about the lesson, their own interest about the topic, or their learning style. So chalkboard activities may not be as effective to all types of students. Okay, so part of the limitations, as I've said, first of all, is the use of formative assessment. So I only used 2 formative assessments to measure the impact of chalkboard activities on learning. So obviously, the more tests used, the more formative tests used, the higher the precision of the data here. Also, it would be recommended that summative tests will be used, because I think in the nature in our school is that when students know it's a formative assessment, they don't really give their best. They're not as objective because they know they're not graded. So because they know they're not graded, it's quite possible that they did not answer the question to the best of their ability. So I wasn't really able to measure what they are learning. Also, I only use 2 tests. So in learning, there should be a variety of tools that the teacher should use to measure learning. So overall, my recommendation is my study really showed the impact of chalkboard activities on student engagement, but it has very limited, reliable, and valid results to measure whether it's impacting student learning. So the use of chalkboard activities to promote student engagement was clear, and I recommend that more study, more action research project will be designed to measure whether chalkboard activities can also impact student learning. Okay, so I want to thank you for your time. Um, if you have any questions, especially here in the uh, results of my quantitative method, feel free to ask. So I basically use unpaired t-tests and also paired t-tests to quantify student learning, and the rest for student engagement. I looked at surveys. I summarized my classroom observation to arrive to the conclusion that it has a positive impact on student engagement. So I would like to thank Ramburg International School, my current school. I was able to have participants, so I can study this uh, technique, teaching technique of using chalkboard activities. I would also like to thank Dr. Ellen and Sister Christine Macias. They observed my class, and also Dr. O'Malley, Dr. Meissner. Thank you for giving me the go signal to conduct this action research in my IB Biology HL class. So thank you for your time.